The Mothman of Point Pleasant is one of the most well-known and carefully documented monsters in American history. Its glowing red eyes and massive wingspan have become synonymous with a terrible feeling of impending doom, or the reoccurring pattern of horrific events. The following accounts presented in this video can be researched further in the book American Monsters by Linda Godfrey, and the documentary The Mothman of Point Pleasant. Joining me in today's video is my very good friend Swamp Dweller. If you enjoy listening to scary stories, be sure to check out his channel after the video. The Curse. The origin of the creature is most commonly linked to the violent slaughter of Native American tribes by the invading colonial militia in 1774, just south of the Ohio River. Realizing that they could not defeat their enemy, Native American Chief Cornstalk negotiated a truce between the settlers and the native tribes to share the land. But after 3 short years, the truce was broken, when the chief and all of his sons were murdered by the soldiers at Fort Randolph. Right before he died, the chief cursed the land of Point Pleasant, which is what was said to have awakened the beast. During the start of the 20th century, after a string of several deadly misfortunes struck the town, including the Ohio River overflowing 4 times between 1913 and 1937, sightings were reported of a bizarre flying creature dubbed the Birdman. The early documented sightings were compiled together in the 1979 book Haunted Valley by James Jones. The creature is said to be enormous, standing as tall as a man with a human head and a wingspan of at least 12 feet. It would swoop down and terrorize motorists as they drove at night, and was said to have been seen most frequently along the banks of the Ohio River. The Scarberry Mallet Sighting.
What came to be known as possibly the most noteworthy sighting ever took place by 2 couples who were on a late-night drive. On November 15th, 1966, Roger and Linda Scarberry, as well as Steve and Mary Mallet, were driving their '57 Chevy to a remote and deserted munitions factory that had been abandoned after World War II, known as the TNT area. As they drove past the northernmost building, Linda gasped and pointed out the silhouette of a man outlined on the road in front of them. Roger slowed the car down as the headlights illuminated the figure, which stood between 6 and 7 feet tall, standing in the dead center of the road, facing them. As they inched closer, Linda pointed out what appeared to be wings folded up behind the creature. As they debated on what to do, the winged stranger turned and ran jerkily on 2 feet towards the abandoned factory. Linda later pointed out as it ran, she noticed the large muscles in its legs. Thoroughly creeped out, the 2 couples decided to turn the car around and leave the area immediately, but debated on whether or not to tell the sheriff, as they knew reporting the encounter would make them sound crazy. As they pulled out onto Route 62 and began driving towards Point Pleasant, Linda screamed and pointed out to what seemed to be the same figure perched on top of a billboard, glowing red eyes fixed on them. It spread its wings and rose vertically into the air, and as the car shot by the billboard, they suddenly realized with terrifying certainty that the creature was following them. As Roger floored it, and others reported spotting the creature flying just behind them and above them, always seeming to match their speed even as Roger reached 100 miles per hour. The flying red-eyed ghost would disappear for perhaps a minute before reappearing, flying along the other side of the car, but never in front of it where the headlights would have illuminated it. Once they even heard the wings beating directly on top of the car's roof. Linda remembered frantically telling Roger to move faster, yet be more careful, as she was terrified they would wreck the car and the thing would swoop down upon them. Once they reached the city lines, the creature seemed to give up and the chase would end, and it would veer away over a nearby field. Once they were safely inside the town, they parked their car and had an argument over what to do. The men were adamant about not going to the police, for fear of ridicule, while the woman desperately wanted to report the attack. Deciding that they needed more proof that the thing was real. They turned the car around and headed back the way they had come. Almost immediately, they spotted a dog lying on the side of the road that hadn't been there before, and as they slowed down to get a better look, the monster repeatedly flew over them again and disappeared over the same field again. This time, when the two couples turned around, they went directly to the police. Upon speaking to Deputy Millard Halstead, the officer agreed to return to the TNT area and investigate. While he didn't believe their story about a red-eyed creature and with a 10-foot wingspan pursuing them, he did recognize the young couples were very shaken up and something had definitely frightened them. After returning to the abandoned factories, the deputy was unable to relocate the creature as he examined the area with his flashlight, though he did find strange horseshoe-like tracks in the dirt. The four witnesses would not leave the safety of their car. The local newspaper, the Athens Messenger, printed the story on the 18th of November, which was the first in a series of events that brought the history of the creature back into the public consciousness. The paper, which named the creature Mothman, a play on Batman, ran the story locally, and it soon spread to national and international news. It was also this reported encounter what caught John Keel's eye, the man who would later write the book The Mothman Prophecies. The article brought in tourists from all over the country, eager to catch a glimpse of the creature themselves, most bringing along their rifles. The area shortly became so overcrowded that the National Guard had to step in to prevent more curious tourists from entering the TNT area. Linda Scarberry was later quoted about the unwelcome attention. "I wish we had never seen it. I wish someone else would have seen it."
The Bennett Sighting. On the night following the Scarberry Mallet sighting, Marcella Bennett was visiting relatives who lived just outside the TNT area. At around 9 p.m., she left the house and began walking to her car with her daughter in her arms. She went to unlock her car when she said that what she thought at first to be a man stepped out from behind her car and stood there staring at her. In the darkness, she could make out that the figure was covered in gray feathers and had wings folded up behind its back. It had its head cocked sideways as if it was examining her. For a split second, she was too stunned to move. Her trance was broken when her brother called out to her from the porch to run. She spun around and ran for the house, still holding her daughter in her arms. She collapsed in terror before reaching the house. While on the ground, she could hear the flapping of large wings behind her. She leapt up again and dashed into the house, collapsing on the couch. Her hands and knees were badly bruised. While her brother called the police, she could hear the children inside the house screaming as the creature walked up onto the porch and peered through the window. By the time the police arrived 20 minutes later, the mysterious winged creature was long gone. The Bosworth Coat Sighting. During the same month, November of 1966, shortly before the Mothman hysteria was in full swing, two motorcyclists, Bob Bosworth and Alan Coates, were riding through the TNT area during the full moon. The light of the moon was so bright they didn't have their headlights on. It was because of that Alan spotted the red eyes watching them past the northern factory building from the roof. Alan stopped his bike, which prompted Bob to do the same. Alan pointed up to the roof and asked Bob if he could see the two bright spots of light that appeared to be looking down at them. Bob responded that he could. Both men immediately abandoned their bikes and walked towards the building to investigate. As they reached the main entrance, both men could still make out the red eyes that appeared to be staring down at them. Once they entered the building without flashlights or weapons of any kind, the men immediately began to feel uneasy, recognizing that whoever, or whatever the thing was, they were in its territory now. As they made their way to the third floor, both men froze as they spotted a dark figure standing in the shadows, outside the glow of the moonlight which came through the windows. Bosworth would later report that he believed the reason he did not see any red eyes that time was because there was no light reflecting off them. Both men stood dead still as the figure silently began to move closer. The only sound was the faint tapping of its feet upon the wooden floor beams. The men recalled the creature's movements as being very slow and precise, almost as if it was anticipating an attack. There were no words spoken between them. Bosworth explained, "If it had been a man, you figured it would have spoken up, asked us what we were doing there." Bosworth and Coates remained in the moonlight, while the figure stayed within the darkness. The men remarked the creature appearing to be very top-heavy, like a bird when its wings are folded up. The creature moved out onto the catwalk alongside the men, spread its wings, and silently flew off into the darkness within the empty factory. The men estimated the figure to have been about 7 feet tall, as they both had to look upwards to look the creature in the face. The Dewitt Sighting.
As tales of the Mothman began to spread, 13-year-old Faye Dewitt and her siblings decided to drive out to the TNT area late one night and catch a glimpse of the creature themselves. Faye was riding in the passenger seat of the truck, and before they had even reached the abandoned factories, her brother hissed at her abruptly not to look out her window. She immediately did and was stunned to discover a creature with bright red eyes staring at her through her window, keeping pace with the truck. The younger children in the back seat began to scream and cry, and Faye shouted for them to stay down and hide. She didn't recall seeing any wings at the time, and assumed the creature was running alongside the truck. She screamed at her brother to drive faster, while he continued to scream back at her not to look at it, but she couldn't take her eyes away from the growing red orbs. She recalled they had intelligence behind them, like they were considering her, and she was afraid to turn her back on it. Her brother took a sharp left and floored the truck into the direction of the northern building, but the creature never broke stride and continued to keep pace beside the passenger window. Faye's brother was forced to hit the brakes and skid to a stop, else he would have crashed into the old loading dock. Faye reports that the creature leapt up upon the hood of the truck as they stopped, and it stared at the two of them through the windshield, its eyes darting back and forth. The younger children screamed, and Faye and her brother remained paralyzed with the fear of a couple heartbeats, unable to move. The creature seemed to lose interest in them, and it suddenly stepped down off the hood and jumped onto a balcony on the side of the building. Faye distinctly recalls not seeing any wings up to that point. She was under the impression it couldn't fly. Her older brother, furious and terrified, leapt from the truck and began hurling chunks of coal at it to chase it away. After a hunk of coal struck the wall a few inches away from its foot, the creature spread its wings for the first time. Faye's brother returned to the truck, and the winged monster flew off into the darkness over their heads, not flapping its wings at all, but merely gliding away like a kite.
The sightings continue. Over the course of the next few months, numerous reports from all over West Virginia and Ohio came pouring into the police department, all very similar in nature, all of a bird-like creature with a massive wingspan and red eyes, sitting out in their yards by the tree line, or perched upon a neighbor's roof, or flying above them in their cars as they drove at night. One man named Lawrence Gray reported to have woken up during the night to find the Mothman standing directly at the foot of his bed, staring at him with its red eyes. One thing most of the accounts had in common was that when the thing flew, it always shot straight up into the air like a helicopter and did not flap its wings. The creature seemed intelligent, and some reported having felt a sense of curiosity or apprehension from the beast. Linda Scarberry would eventually report she saw the Mothman about 18 times over the course of her life, including one time when it was staring through her window at night. She said she felt an intense wave of sadness overwhelm her as she gazed into its eyes. Several biologists were consulted as to what they believed the creature was, and most agreed that what the people witnessed were only large birds, possibly a mutated specimen of the sandhill crane. But Faye Dewitt insisted that the thing she encountered with her siblings was no bird, and was, quote, perfectly formed exactly the way it was supposed to be. The Carpenter Daytime Sighting. Up until the Carpenter sighting, all Mothman encounters had taken place at dusk or at night, leading most to believe that the creature was strictly nocturnal. But while driving along a forest road in broad daylight in late 1966, Connie Carpenter recalled what appeared to be a man, standing alone on the side of the road by an abandoned golf course. Not thinking much of it, she reduced her speed slightly and didn't pay the man any attention. Until his wings unfolded. Connie slammed on the brakes as she saw the creature's wide wingspan. It flew towards her car as if to attack it, and for a few seconds she was completely lost within its dark red eyes. But the creature passed overhead and vanished. She would come to later regret recounting her tale to anyone, as she hated discussing it, and eventually refused to speak about it anymore, hoping to forget it had ever happened. The sightings of the Mothman began to lessen as winter became spring, and by April of 1967, all had stopped. For a short while, the Mothman mania had ended, until November of 1967, when it was spotted outside of a local man's house at night. Upon pulling into his driveway, his headlights fell upon what he perceived to be, quote, a fiery-eyed gargoyle, which stared at him for a few moments before unfolding its wings and taking off vertically into the air. It seemed the Mothman had returned, and it was soon discovered why. The Silver Bridge Incident. On December 15, 1967, a stoplight which controlled the flow of traffic on the Silver Bridge from Pleasant Point over the Ohio River was out. It was 5 o'clock on a Friday, 10 days before Christmas. The bridge was packed with bumper-to-bumper traffic. One of the cables snapped on the bridge and dumped half of the cars directly into the freezing water below. And as the bridge recoiled and swung back the opposite way, another cable snapped and dumped the remaining cars into the river, right before the structure collapsed on top of them. An estimated 30-plus cars plunged into the water and resulted in the deaths of 46 people, 2 of which were never found. Witnesses along the banks of the river reported seeing Christmas gifts floating freely with the current, while rescue boats plowed through them looking for survivors. After the smoke cleared, a rumor began circulating that the Mothman had been spotted on the bridge mere hours before the collapse. Even though no sighting was ever confirmed, the tragedy of the Silver Bridge incident became a permanent addition to the Mothman legend. Ironically, the grief-stricken town lost its obsession with the Mothman almost entirely after the incident. The sobering effect of the catastrophe left everyone unwilling to speak about any sightings of the creature, as the collapse of the bridge was now associated with it. As years went on, across America people still reported seeing the creature preceding major tragedies, including the Chernobyl disaster and 9/11. In 1975, John Keel released his book, The Mothman Prophecies, which became a bestseller not only for the detailed accounts of the Mothman encounters, but also because of the bizarre phenomena that was occurring around the country at the same time, as if being foreshadowed by the creature. Keel would eventually be credited as the individual who eventually made the Mothman legend known worldwide. A movie based on the book was released in 2002. Today, Point Pleasant is home to the Mothman Museum, and even though there haven't been any confirmed sightings of the creature in recent decades, an annual Mothman festival brings more than 10,000 tourists to the community each year. Whether real or not, the legend of the Mothman lives on, and is unlikely to ever be forgotten by history.